Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you hadn't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, Rimuru arrived at the battlefield and instantly shifted the tide of war. He swiftly analyzed the situation and formulated a flawless plan to suppress Velzard, displaying a level of power that left Ghee Crimson completely shocked and visibly rattled. To save Velzard, Ghee switched to his computationally specialized form, his female form. In this hyper-analytical state, he realized that Diablo's strength had evolved to rival his own. Yet, perhaps most terrifying of all, even in this ultimate computationally specialized form, Ghee found himself unable to calculate or comprehend the true depths of Rimuru's power. In this episode, we would briefly describe the process by which Ghee awakened Velzard, the circular secret art invented by Ciel and personally taught to Diablo, and finally, how Ciel ultimately acquired Velzard's ultimate skills. The entire sequence involving Ghee awakening Velzard was arguably the most predictable part of the book, following a structure almost identical to the web novel. In fact, their emotional entanglement had lasted literally several volumes, so here we would use more concise language to summarize the essence, while shifting most of our focus to Veldanava's revival and the transformation of Velzard's abilities. So, let's get started. Ghee successfully slipped into Velzard's core. The atmosphere here was unbearably tense. One wrong word could cause Velzard's consciousness to collapse entirely or shut herself away forever. What Ghee saw was not the majestic might of the strongest true dragon, but a Velzard with the appearance and fragility of a lost young girl. This was the representation of her deepest, most vulnerable self. Her first reaction to Ghee's arrival was extreme defensiveness and self-doubt. To her, the arrogant Ghee seemed to have come here simply to mock her. Ghee shook his head with a bitter smile. For him, the fact that Velzard reacted at all was already a good sign. Seeing Velzard reveal such fragility, the arrogant demon lord experienced, for the first time, something like consideration for another person. He tried to break the tension with a light tone, telling her he had come to take her home, but that seemingly simple phrase lit the fuse. Velzard exploded. What she hated most was precisely this kind of taken-for-granted superiority and patronizing protection from Ghee. Her breakdown had not been formed overnight. It was the eruption of tens of thousands of years of suppressed emotion. She cried out the three pains that had been tearing her apart. First was the unfairness of fate. Her sister Velgrind could chase her beloved Rudra across the world, living dramatically and freely. Her brother Veldora could cause mischief without restraint. But Velzard, the eldest, had been forced to shoulder the duty entrusted by Veldanava, monitoring Ghee and guiding the world. She had endured in silence for ages. Second, because Veldanava had acknowledged Ghee and entrusted the world to him, Ghee technically stood above Velzard in authority. This left Velzard trapped in his shadow, desperate to surpass him, yet desperately wanting to be seen by him, feeling like a mere appendage. Third was jealousy, raw, unfiltered, uncontrollable jealousy born from neglect. Ghee had spent millennia fixated on Rudra, and now, out of nowhere, an absurdly mysterious slime had appeared, one who clearly captured Ghee's interest. Velzard had waited for Ghee to turn back toward her, only to realize she was always placed behind others. Desperate to soothe her, Ghee spoke the worst possible sentence, that Velzard had always been his woman, someone he had always cared about. That smashed the last trigger. Velzard roared back at him. She was not his possession. What she needed was equality. That was the truth. Velzard did not want to defeat Ghee. She did not truly hate him. What she hated was being protected. She did not want to be the woman standing behind the strongest demon lord. She wanted to be his equal, fighting side by side. She did not want to watch Ghee admire that slime, while giving her only obligatory, dismissive regard. In the mental world, Velzard turned her rage into blades, slashing again and again at Ghee's spiritual form. And Ghee did not dodge, he did not counterattack. he let her vent. He let every violent strike land until her power depleted and the lethal blows softened into helpless fists against his chest. When Velzard cried in Ghee's arms like a child, Ghee finally gave her the answer she had waited thousands of years for. Velzard had always been the one he acknowledged. She had always been his one and only partner. To Ghee, Rimuru was an entertaining friend. Rudra was a rival of 10,000 years, but the only one who had always remained by his side was Velzard. But this alone did not ease Velzard's pain. She finally revealed the root of her terror, the reason she betrayed, the reason she endured. She feared Ghee would die, and the one who would kill him would be her brother, the creator god, Star King Dragon Veldanava. Ghee froze. That premise made no sense. Veldanava was dead. He had not revived. Ghee thought so, but the Velzard, crying into his chest, finally, reluctantly, whispered the truth that overturned everything. Veldanava had already revived. A revelation that shook the very foundation of the story finally came to light. Yet, Ghee's reaction was unexpectedly calm. He had sensed this possibility long ago, so he only asked one question: when? And Velzard painfully admitted it'd been a while. Ghee's casual "I see" ignited Velzard's fury once more. She screamed that Ghee could never defeat Veldanava. Since he would be killed eventually, she might as well give him a swift end herself. This contained a terrifying implication. Veldanava almost certainly intended to kill Ghee. Velzard's logic was extreme, but painfully real. She understood Veldanava's power better than anyone. If Ghee died by a god's hand, he would disappear completely, his soul erased. So, her twisted love told her to kill him herself, because if she killed him, he could still revive. But Ghee did not get angry. Instead, he wore that infuriatingly confident smile, claiming that losing to Veldanava had been a long time ago, and next time he would win. Velzard looked at him with utter despair, but at this moment Ghee extended his hand and spoke the one sentence that shattered all her defenses. Ghee admitted that he could not defeat Veldanava alone, so he needed Velzard to fight alongside him. Those words broke the dam. Velzard finally screamed out the truth buried for millions of years, that she absolutely hated Ghee, and yet uncontrollably loved him more than anyone. Ghee's reply was so simple it was outrageous. Just a quiet, "I know." That was both his arrogance and his tenderness. Ghee did not deny her, did not comfort her. He simply accepted her feelings as naturally as breathing. When Velzard sobbed that he was not gentle, Ghee still answered in that infuriatingly calm tone, that she was his partner, like family, so there was no need to act distant. Hearing the words partner and family, Velzard's face turned bright red. Ghee, apparently oblivious to her reaction, continued. The two of them had been together so long that in human terms they were basically husband and wife. Those two words, husband and wife, detonated like a nuclear bomb in Velzard's heart. No romance, no ritual, straight to old married couple status. Even though Ghee meant none of the romantic undertones, for Velzard that was enough. Her cheeks flushed like a maiden in love, and the glacier in her heart finally melted. The confused, crying girl vanished, replaced by the strongest true dragon, reborn with clarity in her eyes and a peaceful smile on her face. Velzard whispered softly that she had returned. Now that the emotional knot had unraveled, it was time to talk business. Velzard restored her impossibly beautiful feminine form and solemnly asked Ghee whether he truly intended to oppose Veldanava. Ghee's reply was firm and absolute. The Veldanava he once knew was never someone who operated through cowardly schemes in the shadows. If Veldanava wanted to destroy the world, he could have done so effortlessly, without resorting to such petty, underhanded methods. The reason Ghee needed to defeat the Veldanava of today was precisely to defend the dignity of the Veldanava of the past. The former Star King Dragon was righteous, open, and honorable. He would never orchestrate the world's destruction from a dark corner like this. If the god standing before them had already changed, then, to Ghee, he was no longer a friend, but an enemy that had to be eliminated. Of course, Velzard revealed more details. First, after his revival, Veldanava had remained asleep in the deepest chamber of the Star Palace, a place only Velzard and Feldway could enter. Second, Veldanava's sense of self had drastically changed. Maybe some memories persisted, but he was no longer the Veldanava Ghee once knew. Third, Velzard originally assumed he was merely hiding his revival while waiting for his full strength to return. But now it appeared there was a far larger scheme at play. Fourth, and perhaps the most tragic, was Feldway. Even though he had access to Veldanava's resting place, he had absolutely no idea Veldanava had already awakened. He was still foolishly carrying out orders, unaware that he had long since become a disposable pawn on the board. Since war was inevitable, they needed to eliminate all hidden risks. Ghee sharply pointed out Velzard's current weakness. Velzard's ultimate skill, Lord of Patience, was granted by Veldanava. Everything she did was naturally visible to him. Worse, relying on power granted by an opposing side meant she lacked even the qualifications to stand on the same battlefield. If she continued using it, Veldanava could reclaim or manipulate that power at any moment. But Ghee had already sensed that Velzard possessed a second, ultimate skill. Velzard admitted she indeed had another one, Lord of Envy, a skill opposite in attribute to Lord of Patience. It was precisely this contradictory ability that allowed her to retain a sliver of her own will, even under Feldway's Lord of Justice. Velzard asked for Ghee's plan, but Ghee explained that the priority was resolving her ultimate skill problem. And his solution was simple. They needed Rimuru to evolve her skills. Ghee stated that the sly, secret-filled slime had said ultimate skills could evolve. If anyone forgot this part, please revisit episode 76. This also showed just how seriously Ghee treated every casual remark Rimuru had ever made. He also pointed out that Velgrin's skill transformation had very obviously been handled by Rimuru as well. Ghee spoke with firm conviction, full of absolute trust in Rimuru. Although Velzard still felt a little jealous of that mysterious slime, the fact that Rimuru had tamed Veldora and successfully handled Velgrind was undeniable. So she decided she would trust him, at least this once. The moment she agreed, Ghee's astral body withdrew from Velzard's core. A second later, his consciousness snapped back into his physical form. The perspective then shifted to Rimuru. At the same moment Ghee entered Velzard's core, the real world displayed a dramatic sight. Diablo, dressed in his black butler suit, cradling an unconscious, breathtaking red-haired woman in his arms. Black and crimson intertwined, handsome man with stunning beauty. It looked almost divinely staged. But as the onlooker, Rimuru was unbelievably bored. Time flowed differently in the spiritual world. Ghee's internal marital quarrel might have lasted ages in there, but only a few minutes had passed outside. Maintaining his giant slime form, Rimuru continued enveloping the stampede Velzard with the imaginary collapse. With nothing better to do, Rimuru took the chance to examine Frost Dragon Velzard up close, and arrived at a precise conclusion. Velzard's Magiculi count at this moment actually exceeded Velgrin's post-evolution level, and was on par with Veldora's. Yet, despite facing a rampaging true dragon, Rimuru felt no pressure at all. This effortless suppression surprised even him. His current energy reserves had grown to an absurd, terrifying level. Of course, Rimuru owed this monstrous strength entirely to his ultimate skill, God of Void, Azathoth. And here was the great irony. Feldway had used chronosaltation to exile Rimuru to the end of time and space, intending to banish him for eternity. But instead, he had given Ciel infinite time to analyze and master imaginary collapse. Imaginary collapse was essentially the catastrophic collapse factor, minus energy, accumulated at the end of time and space. Rimuru admitted openly that he couldn't understand Ciel's explanations about the non-constant speed of light or the non-absolute nature of time. But he did understand one thing. This energy was a world-ending supercharged power block, so overwhelming that even Ciel initially couldn't control it. only because they had spent countless immeasurable eons in a place without time, was Ciel finally able to master it. Time didn't exist in that void, and under Ciel's guidance, Rimuru trained endlessly, honing every skill and technique. This was briefly mentioned back in Volume 21, but in Volume 23, this training became massively significant. During training, Rimuru once tried using void energy to cast a basic fireball, and the result was an explosion on par with nuclear magic, nuclear flame. That alone proved just how uncontrollable void was. If he had tested this in the central world, or even inside Ramirez's labyrinth, the consequences would have been unthinkable. Only the perfectly empty end of time and space made this training possible. In short, Feldway had completely shot himself in the foot. He had accidentally become Rimuru's greatest growth accelerator. After finishing his self-analysis, the bored Rimuru shifted his attention to Diablo. He had to admit, Diablo was a genuine madman, and also a genius. Under normal circumstances, a physical body could never withstand the corrosive erosion of imaginary collapse. To utilize such power, Ciel had developed the circular secret art. By exploiting the slime cell's infinite regeneration properties, the technique allowed the regeneration rate to exceed the speed at which imaginary collapse destroyed the body, thereby creating an internal energy loop. It was a brute force solution born entirely from biological advantage. Diablo, however, had invented a wild, improvised method of his own. Diablo did not possess slime cells. Instead, he used the authority of Lord of Temptation, Temptation World. By distorting reality itself, he deceived his own body into believing it could withstand the energy, thereby forcibly creating an imitation of the circular secret art. Rimuru's evaluation was simple. This was pure, unfiltered suicide. If Rimuru had returned even a moment later, Diablo's body would have collapsed entirely. Of course, Rimuru also knew Ciel would have intervened at the final moment. There was no way she would actually allow Diablo to die. At this point, Ciel had officially taught Diablo the legitimate version of the circular secret art, using Rimuru-sama's voice, of course. This made Rimuru certain that Diablo must have felt something was off. Since when did Rimuru-sama suddenly become an expert in theoretical magical physics? Yet Diablo instantly understood the complex theories that Rimuru himself couldn't comprehend, and he and Ciel carried on an enthusiastic academic discussion. The heartwarming lesson scene made Rimuru feel strangely left out. Listening to Ciel borrow his mouth to talk theory with Diablo, Rimuru felt like an outsider intruding on someone else's conversation. Rimuru did a mental survey of his subordinates. Benimaru was almost certainly as clueless as he was. Given that Benimaru was even more emotionally immature, it was unlikely he'd grasp anything theoretical. Carrera, driven entirely by instinct and battle intuition, would surely have zero interest in theory. Only the academic elites, Testarossa and Ultima, might be capable of understanding Ciel's lecture the same way Diablo did. While Rimuru was absent-mindedly thinking about how nice it would be to join the conversation, Ghee suddenly opened his eyes. His first words were to accuse Rimuru of slacking off. Rimuru was startled and instinctively wanted to defend himself, but the female version of Ghee cut him off with a single, cold glare. Rimuru realized to his despair that he had absolutely no resistance against beautiful women. If the male Ghee had glared at him, he might have snapped back, but when the gorgeous female Ghee did it, he instantly folded. Before Rimuru could explain, Ghee activated thought acceleration. Everything that had occurred in the mental world, Veldanava's revival, Velzard's condition, the request to deal with the Lord of Patience, was stuffed into Rimuru's brain like a violently compressed data packet. It felt like swallowing Milim's Drago Nova and waking up with a murderous hangover. Rimuru suspected Ghee had done it on purpose, but he couldn't deny that the process instantly updated him on the situation. The task was clear: modify Velzard's ultimate skill, remove Veldanava's influence, and Ghee assured him that Velzard had fully agreed to cooperate. Rimuru instinctively felt this kind of issue required a 3-day, 3-night strategy meeting, but Ciel's voice rang in his mind with palpable excitement, claiming that this would be a perfect opportunity. Rimuru immediately understood. For Ciel, this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to legitimately analyze the strongest true dragon, Velzard. It was a feast for a scientific maniac. As for what Ciel intended to completely do, Rimuru chose to feign ignorance and stay out of her way. The moment Rimuru nodded, Ciel took control. Without any warning, Velzard's massive dragon body vanished into thin air. Ciel had used predation, swallowing Velzard straight into the imaginary space. The sight made Ghee jump to his feet in shock, demanding to know what Rimuru had done. Rimuru kept a firm front, insisting everything was fine and that Ghee should trust him, though he was also frantically asking Ciel what she was doing. Ghee looked far from convinced, suspicion written all over his face. At that moment, Diablo once again displayed his signature toxic fanatics behavior. He leaned toward Ghee with clear irritation, accusing him of showing disgraceful disrespect toward Rimuru-sama. Ghee snapped back that Diablo was unbearably annoying, and that he had no intention of being blindly devoted to Rimuru like Diablo was. Seeing the two troublesome idiots about to fight again, Rimuru rushed in to prevent another disaster. To reassure Ghee, Rimuru asked Ciel to visualize the progress. Ciel projected a massive transparent sphere in the air, made of slime cells displaying Velzard curled inside, like a peacefully sleeping fetus. Seeing Velzard unharmed, both Ghee and Diablo stopped arguing, their gazes fixed on the sphere, like two overly curious children. Just as Rimuru was internally complaining about why he always had to play Peacemaker, the modification process was already complete. In the real world, Ciel delivered a cheerful report. The alteration was successful. She had integrated Lord of Patience, Gabriel, and Lord of Envy, Leviathan, evolving them into the new ultimate skill, Lord of Divine Ice, Cthulhu. Ciel added, almost casually, that all relevant information had been fully collected. Rimuru gazed into the distance and nodded knowingly. Of course. Ciel never left empty-handed. Velzard's data had undoubtedly been extracted down to the last atom. Alright, that's all for this video. Before Volume 23 came out, many fans debated how much of Velzard's dragon factor or skill information Ciel had obtained, especially since, after defeating Michael, Lord of Justice did contain some of Velzard's data, but Lord of Envy had certainly not been included. Now, everything was laid bare. Ciel had analyzed Velzard completely, which meant Rimuru's True Dragon nucleation and True Dragon release should now include the Frost Dragon as an option. In truth, in front of the infinite energy provided by imaginary collapse, concepts like True Dragon release or existence points no longer felt particularly important. Their meaning was overshadowed simply because Rimuru's power level had skyrocketed beyond all reason. This wasn't really a flaw unique to TenSura. Any long-running novel or manga would eventually run into the same escalation problem. But Volume 23 was a rare case where we actually witnessed Rimuru's personal growth that finally addressed a major, long-standing argument that Rimuru wasn't strong on his own, that it was always Ciel who was strong, and the beginning of that growth traced back to the brutal training at the end of time and space. We would continue witnessing Rimuru's growth as the story progressed. In our next episode, we would view Rimuru's miracle from Velzard and Ghee's perspectives. Furthermore, regarding Veldanava's resurrection, it has clearly become an issue whether many will continue to stand on the same side. Therefore, assessing the trustworthiness of every combat asset seems to have become a matter of immediate urgency. The next episode would be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.